Hello friends, welcome to Political Science and International Relations. In this lecture, we are going to discuss a very important concept in political science. It is also an important concept under sociology. This is historical materialism. Historical materialism is an important doctrine under Marxism. So, associated ideology is Marxism. The scholar associated is Karl Marx. Along with historical materialism, you are going to study associated concepts, class and society as envisaged by Karl Marx. What is the conception of society as well as class by Karl Marx? We will look into these as well. Okay, before studying historical materialism, let's briefly look into Karl Marx. Most of you should be well aware of the scholar Karl Marx. Karl Marx was a German philosopher. He is also seen as an economist. He is a sociologist also, even though Karl Marx did not consider himself as a sociologist. Karl Marx greatly contributed to the disciplines sociology as well as political science. Marxism is a very important ideology. Even though we don't find Marxism as an important philosophy present in many states of the world today, nevertheless, Marxism continues to influence political philosophy, political theory and political science. Okay, Karl Marx was born in Germany in the year 1818 in the city called Trier in the Prussian state. Germany was unified only later. Before that, Prussia was the most important state in Germany. It was the important German state. Karl Marx was initially sent by his father to study law. Later, he switched on to philosophy. Marx was first sent to study at the University of Bonn. Later, he went to the University of Berlin. Marx had a very unique personality. He was straightforward and honest, but initially he did not have a stable personality. After taking up law, he was unable to continue. He took up philosophy. In Germany, Marx came under the influence of the German philosopher Hegel. Hegel was a towering figure in Western philosophy and specifically in German philosophy. Marx himself was influenced by Hegel. The students who were influenced by Hegel and followed his philosophy were called the young Hegelians. There was another group called right Hegelians, but right Hegelians are not important for us. Young Hegelians are important. Marx himself was a young Hegelian. Young Hegelians were influenced by Hegel's philosophy, but they modified Hegel's philosophy. For Hegel, idea was more important. He gave importance to idealism. But for the young Hegelians, materialism was more important. So this is the difference between Hegel and young Hegelians. Marx himself was a young Hegelian. Marx was very radical right from his young age. His philosophy was heavily influenced by his personal life. His father was a Jew. Marx himself is a Jew. Marx's father later converted to Protestantism for some reasons. So Marx obtained the conviction that religion was just a convenience. It can be used for selfish reasons. Later his wife left him because of poverty. So Marx developed a very strong conviction that the society is heavily determined by materialism. We will now look at the important works of Karl Marx. Marxism was the philosophy of Karl Marx, but Marxism cannot be attributed to Marx alone. Another important contributor was Marx's friend Friedrich Engels, a businessman from England. He also contributed to Marxism. Marx was switching from one city to another because the states did not like him. He was very radical. He was writing in important journals. He used to write bravely against the governments. He wrote against the Prussian state at the time. He called the Prussian state a royal terrorist. Such was his characterization of the ruling class. He was against the ruling class. He saw concentration of power in the hands of the ruling class. As a result, the ruling class did not like him. So he was sent away from one country into another country. So he kept on moving. He later met Friedrich Engels. Together they worked and contributed to Marxism. The important works of Karl Marx are Paris manuscripts written in 1844. The most important work perhaps is the Communist Manifesto written jointly by Engels and Marx in 1848. Das Kapital written in 1867, and a contribution to the critique of political economy written in 1859. These are some of the important works of Karl Marx. Many tend to interchangeably use the term Marxism and communism. But communism itself is a concept under Marxism. Communism is nothing but the end stage of society as envisaged by Marx. According to Marx, the society called capitalism will eventually get self-destroyed and we will reach a society called communism. Right? In between, there will be a intermediate society called socialism. This will be achieved through a process called class conflict, which we will study later. I will separately discuss alienation along with class conflict in a separate lecture. As of now, keep in mind, Marx told that capitalism will ultimately get destroyed and become communism, passing through the stage socialism. So communism is a concept within Marxism. Marx can be seen as an economist, he can be seen as a sociologist, he can even be seen as a political scientist. Marx in his young age was a radical humanist. The young Marx can be compared to scholars like Gandhiji and Anna Arendt. He was thinking about the plight of man. He was sympathizing with man. So young Marx was a humanist. He spoke about the concept called alienation. In alienation, he was talking about the plight of the worker, the suffering of the worker under capitalism. I will explain alienation in a separate lecture later. The mature Marx actually spoke about communism. So mature Marx's philosophy was scientific socialism. So scientific socialism talks about class struggle, class conflict. He explains how capitalist society will eventually get destroyed and communism will be reached. So you can see Marx through two larger perspectives, young Marx and mature Marx. Okay friends, now we will look into the concept historical materialism. There is another concept called dialectical materialism. I have given a separate lecture for dialectical materialism. Please go through the video. To tell dialectical materialism in brief, dialectical materialism is a combination of dialectics and materialism. Marx borrowed dialectics from Hegel. He borrowed materialism from young Hegelians. Marx himself was a young Hegelian. So dialectics of Hegel and materialism from young Hegelians contributed to the philosophy dialectical materialism. According to Hegel, society evolves through ideas. Okay, man thinks, so it is called idea. The ideas keep on developing. As a result, society also develops. This is how Hegel sees dialectics. Dialectics is nothing but the evolution of society through ideas. But Marx looks at dialectics in a different manner. He does not accept the concept of idea. He accepts the concept of materialism. He tells that society is evolving. He agrees with it. But he tells that society does not evolve through ideas. Idea itself is a product of material or matter. Idea itself is derived from material or matter. So society actually evolves through materialism and not through idealism. This is called dialectical materialism. Historical materialism is nothing but the application of dialectical materialism into history. So dialectical materialism, when applied to human history, becomes historical materialism. Historical materialism is the most important doctrine of Karl Marx. In simple words, historical materialism tells that history is laid by material forces. History is not laid by ideas, it is laid by material forces. Let me explain with a simple example. Let's take the history of India. We can roughly trace the history of India from Indus Valley civilization till today. Am I correct? Indus Valley civilization followed by Vedic period, followed by Mahajanamadas, followed by Mauryan Empire, followed by other empires. Then came the Mughal dynasty, then came the British Empire. Now we are independent India. Hegel will look at the history of India through ideas, but Marx will look at the history of India through materialism. He will look at Indus Valley civilization through materialism. He will look at the scientific developments of the Indus Valley civilization. Later, he will look at the different empires through materialism once again. He will look at the related technology. Babur, Mughal ruler, came to India with some technologies in hand. Once again, it is a form of materialism. Later came the British Empire. They came to India actually for materials. Am I correct? They wanted to take the material wealth of India. This is how Marx will look into the history of India. Later, we obtained independence. Independence struggle itself will be looked at by Marx through materialism, because there were stakeholders who were themselves looking for material, the ruling class. So this is how Marx looks at history. History is determined by materialism. It is determined by material forces. This is called historical materialism. Historical materialism, this term was not coined by Marx, it was coined by Plekhanov. Plekhanov was a Russian philosopher and revolutionary. He was the mentor of Lenin. He was Lenin's guru. Vladimir Lenin, the most important leader of the Soviet Union. Plekhanov mentored him. Friedrich Engels, Marx's friend and an important contributor to Marxism, he actually spoke about historical materialism in his book Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. So Friedrich Engels elaborately spoke about historical materialism. Okay, now what is the basic philosophy of Karl Marx with respect to historical materialism? Let's see. many of the scholars, they looked at history through order and stability. They looked at society through cooperation. But Marx was unique. He looked at society through tensions and struggles. So this is a very unique conception of society. Marx is looking at society and history not through order, not through stability, but through tension and struggle. Okay? He tells that society is a moving balance of antithetical forces that generate social change. So, society is moving. As a result, you see history. Society moves, leading to creation of history. But what you see in this mechanism is antithetical forces. What are antithetical forces? Forces which act opposite to each other. These are called antithetical forces. These antithetical forces generate social change. As a result, history is created, society keeps on evolving. Now, these antithetical forces are seen in the form of tensions and struggle. So, this is how Marx looks at history and society. He tells that tension, struggle and strife is more important. Strife is the father of all things according to Karl Marx. Right. So, what do you see in society is tensions, struggle. Men are positioned in society. But what you see is antithetical relationship. Now, Marx explains about material forces. The first historical act of man is the production of the material life. All of us are human beings. We have basic needs, is it not? Food, clothing and other needs. So what is the first historical act of man? To produce the material life. So man first started producing for the material life. Initially, man started as an animal, later evolved. He started hunting other animals, ate other animals for food. So, nothing but a activity for the material life. So, this is the historical act as seen by Karl Marx. Now, he mentions about the production of means. Okay. So, man starts producing. He also starts producing the means to satisfy the basic needs of life. Okay. For example, man wanted to hunt animals first. He started developing some tools and weapons. So, how do you look at the tools and weapons? As means. Only using these means, man can satisfy his basic needs. So, this is how man started producing. He started satisfying his needs. After satisfying one need, he satisfied the other needs. So, with new needs, man continued to produce new means to keep the material life going. First it was basic needs, then came the secondary needs. Now, if you look closely, man is engaging in such a production where he is producing the means and continuing with the material life. But here, the antagonistic cooperation is still seen. Get it? For example, in the ancient society, man was hunting animals. But there were many societies at that time. Each group will hunt. Each group satisfied its needs. This society is seen as primitive communism by Karl Marx. He did not exactly explain what is the nature of the society, but primitive communism can be compared with the ancient societies where men lived as group and they produced without any antagonistic relationship. So earlier, antagonistic relationship was not seen. Earlier, no antagonism. Later started antagonism between men in the process of producing for the material life. So this antagonism started after the first society, which is seen as primitive communism by Karl Marx. In the primitive society, whatever was produced by man was used for his own consumption. So men living as a group, they produced. Initially they hunted, later they went for agriculture and for other activities. But whatever they produced, they consumed themselves. There was no surplus. Later started emerging surplus. When surplus started emerging, we were also able to see domination by one man over another man. This naturally led to division of labor. What is division of labor? Different tasks will be shared between members of a society. This is called division of labor. Each man will perform a duty which is seen suited to its abilities. This is called division of labor. But division of labor itself is a result of the antagonism between men after the primitive stage of the society. So antagonism has now started, and the antagonism later continued throughout history. So society and history itself is seen through the class struggle between antagonistic classes. If you look into the Indian context, the Varna system provides a framework for understanding the antagonistic classes. Not just the Varna system, there are many such systems across the world. If you look at the Greek society had social hierarchy earlier. On the top, the Greek citizens were present. Below the Greek citizens were present the metics or the middle class. Below the metics were present the freedmen or the lower class. Below the freedmen were the slaves. Now each class refers to the group of people. They were antagonistic to each other, but yet they existed in the same society. So history was moving like this. When you look into the Indian context, the Varna system also had different classes. There are 4 classes in the Varna system. Brahmanical class, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. Marx tells that in different periods in history, the nature of the antagonism between classes will be different. In other words, there will be different competitors or different classes at different point in time. So Marx tells this under historical materialism. There will be antagonism. You will see antagonistic classes, but the antagonistic classes are not constant. They keep changing. During a phase, there may be 2 antagonistic classes. after many years you may see another two classes. Class 3, class 4. In another period in history you may see two different classes. Marx tells that history moves in this pattern. The competitors keep changing. The antagonic classes keep changing. So the classes are not constant. They are changing over time. For example, in the society called slave society, the two antagonic classes were the master and the slave. Antagonistic to each other, master and slave. Later came the feudal society. In the feudal society, the two antagonic classes were the lord and the serf. Antagonistic to each other. Master controlled the slave. Here, lord controlled the serf. Later came the capitalist society. The capitalist society, the capitalist controlled the worker. Once again, there was antagonism between two classes. Two classes having antagonism. Two classes having antagonism. Two classes having antagonism. Society moves like this, according to Karl Marx. As already seen, Hegel looks at such an evolution through ideas. Marx looks at such an evolution through materialism. Right. Now we will study how the relationship between different classes are established and how the society gets constructed as a result. Before that, we will look into the concept of class. Marx defines class as a concept. According to him, class refers to a group of people who are similarly situated with respect to the means of production. So people who are similar to each other with respect to means of production can be called a class. For example, capitalists are a class because they are similarly situated with respect to means of production. They own the means of production. They are similar to each other. So they belong to one class, capitalists. Workers, they belong to one class. They don't have the ownership of the means of production. Got it? So when you look at workers with respect to means of production, they don't have the ownership. Nevertheless, they are also a class. So workers are have-nots with respect to means of production. Capitalists are haves with respect to means of production. So Marx looks at the position of the people with respect to the means of production.